The first story that I want to tell is the story of me growing up with a disabled sister. Now, I have a book coming out about this in a couple of weeks, in part, in some ways, but I think I've never really talked about it a lot in the specific way, just because I view it as something that I don't want to victimize myself while telling it, just because I'm not a victim and my sister's a blessing to me. And regardless of her ability to think critically or regulate her emotions or whatever, I still love my sister. I'll always love my sister. And she's really, really been impactful to me in more ways than I can probably even comprehend. Definitely more ways than I can comprehend, as it turns out. But I think so for context, I'm the oldest of three. I have a younger brother and a younger sister. My sister's the middle child. My brother's the youngest. And my sister's about 14 and a half months younger than I am. She's been autistic basically her entire life. And, like I say in Spectrum of Lies, my book that's coming out, it is a kind of a fashionable thing to be autistic now. People are just kind of doing coming out posts for it on TikTok, like, oh my God, I'm autistic, like, look at me, whatever. My sister has actual autism, so for people who grift onto autism, this is not the same as those folks. But basically, why I think dealing with my sister's disability was so important is because it shaped my perception of everything. It shaped my perception of love, of women, of family, of relationships, of values, of just so many things. Because really, when I was growing up, my sister was the thing that my family oriented themselves around. Just one, out of necessity, and two, because we loved her, and three, just kind of, it was such a big gravitational pull that we had to base a lot of things out of it. For example, we had limits of times we could spend at restaurants. We didn't go to church as often as some other people, just because sitting quietly and without being able to move or do something and listen to a Catholic sermon for 45 minutes and stand up and sit down and kneel and sing and all those things. My sister did not like that. I did not like that. Most people do not really like to do those type of things. And that's not Catholic bashing, but that's just kind of the way that our family worked. And so I think that when I look back oftentimes at growing up in my family dynamic and how different it was from a lot of other people, and I'm not saying that people don't have struggles. I didn't have an alcoholic father, for example. I didn't have a mother that abandoned me. I didn't have, infighting or divorce or a lot of things. And this was just kind of my version of a lot of things that are unfortunately far common in a lot of other stories. Thankfully, my parents loved each other very much, still love each other very much. My family we had problems, but we were basically tight throughout the entire time. But I think I almost just kind of pushed this under the rug. We didn't make really a big deal out of saying that, my sister's autism was, a big thing or whatever and all that sort of thing. But looking back on it, it was a big deal. And it really affected all of us quite a bit. And my sister, obviously, most presciently, but a lot of us, all together as well. And I think what really I took from it, and the biggest impact that it had on me, is that it made me radically independent. And I think that comes from multiple factors. First, I was the oldest, so naturally I've done this, bro science is like oldest child syndrome. I don't even know if that's a thing or not, but to me it is. And so I have, oldest child syndrome because I am the oldest. I'm responsible. I have to organize everything. It kind of still comes out now. When we were at family events or mini golfing or whatever, I still kind of have hey, everyone get in the straight line and do whatever. And I'm not like that anyway. I have OCD, given from that, or I don't know, OCD, whatever. Anyways, like I said, I'm shooting from the hip here. I don't have notes. So I was already kind of type A just from that perspective, but what made me more type A and made me more independent was that I always had to be like the okay kid. That's kind of how I put it often, is that, my brother had issues in terms of younger siblings learn from their older siblings. And, my brother being next in line after my sister, with my sister being, disabled and impaired and a bunch of things that rubbed off on him. And so he had some intellectual things and hated school, and a lot of people hate school, which is fine. But, my parents had to spend more time with my brother and sister, and they basically said okay, Sam, just stay here. Don't burn the house down. Just stay and do whatever, and we'll get to you eventually. And that I don't blame my parents for that at all, because again, they had to do it. They were kind of they were young parents at the time. They had never had kids. They had 3 kids under the age of 4, I think, at one point. Because 3 kids under the age of 4 at one point. My dad had a demanding job. My mom was running around all over the place. All that sort of thing. My mom's family was kind of a mess for a while as well, and so she had a lot of those things to deal with. So I just kind of had to be separate from everything that my brother and sister had, which kind of gave me a little bit of an expedited childhood, I feel. And to do that, I had to be the person that was depended on. When my dad was at work or when my mom needed something, they would always go to me first. And my brother and sister didn't really have a lot of the responsibility that I did. They had other things they had to do as well. But it taught me from a pretty early age that I had to stand on my own 2 feet. And I had to, if I wanted something done, I had to go out and get it myself. I had to study by myself. I had to work by myself. I had to go outside. I could not depend on my parents for getting something done for me and aiding me in the way that they aided my brother and my sister. And, baked into that as well is a thing that I developed, was that I didn't want to burden my parents with anything, because I could take some time away from my sister, could take some time away from my brother, so I'm just going to figure it out by myself. And I became very, very, very self-sufficient from a very young age, which in a way is good, but in a way also I think what this period taught me, particularly from my sister's disability, is that there's a limit to independence. There's a limit to self-reliance. There's a limit to self-sufficiency, because what that developed in me was kind of a narcissism complex and a empowerment complex that shouldn't have been there, and a holier than thou complex that has led me into a lot of very sinful behaviors and, things that, I'm very stubborn. It kind of runs in my family. I have a temper that also runs in my family, but I certainly fueled those things with all of the stuff that I have to work on my own 2 feet. And I didn't understand the limits of this up until very late in my life, probably in college or a little bit past college. We'll get to that in a second, but I didn't see that those had limits. I just thought that those were the way that things were. I thought that they were the way that life was going to be for me. If I had to go out, I had to eat what I kill. I had to earn it. And that was why I went into sales. That's why I didn't like group projects. That's why I've started a couple companies now. That's why I don't like authority. That's why I don't trust politicians. That's why I don't trust the government. That's why I don't trust corporations. That's why I don't trust top-down control on everything. I hate being controlled. I hate telling people what to do. I hate being told what to do. I've always had that. I always have kind of an anti-authoritarian streak, which is all a result of this era of my life. And also, I think that, it also kind of fed, I'll maybe end with this, is that I'm very anti-therapy for the most part. Unless you've had like PTSD or you're coming back from the military or you've had a death in the family or something, that's fine. But for people that are using therapy as kind of a Band-Aid for like, I feel sad today, like I don't really have a lot of sympathy for that. But so I've been very anti-therapy, and I've kind of been digging into as of why, because I'm like, maybe I might need therapy. I don't know. I got a lot of issues, as it turns out. But anyways, so I've been wondering why I've been so anti-therapy. And I think a big reason is because I believe, and I firmly believe this still, I'm not backing down on this from 1 inch. I believe that therapy is an inherently anti-family institution. It divides the family, because we see this with the trans youth craziness that we have going on. We see this with a lot of things. They say at the end of the day, you have childhood trauma, your parents screwed you up, they're bad people, you should not listen to them, so listen to me. Outsource it to a medical complex or a medication or a therapeutic practice or the government or another institution or something, because the family's the problem, your parents screwed you up, and it's not your fault. And I refuse to accept that. I refuse to accept that, because I don't think that's fair. I'm an Enneagram 8, if you guys couldn't tell by this point. I've been digging into this a lot recently too. Enneagram 8s are obsessed with justice and fairness and making sure justice is served. And I am very much like that. That's why I don't like power or authority or misuse of authority most presciently. And so I said, you're never going to tell me, ever, that my parents are the problem with issues in my life. I will not allow that to be outsourced to my parents. I will not allow that to be something that affects me. But looking back on it, in terms of me being so self-reliant, so independent, what I think is deeper than that in my pushback to therapy, and what is the other side of the coin of this self-reliance is that I feel like a big portion of why I have never gone to therapy for more than like a couple of months. I went a couple of months in college because I was like sad or whatever. But in therapy, I think that what I'm afraid of if I go to therapy is that they would tell me my parents neglected me. And why that scares me is that I don't think that would be wrong. I don't think that's the whole story, but I don't think it's necessarily wrong. And that's been a tough pill to swallow for me for a very, very long time because I do feel that way to a degree. I was very resentful of my parents. I was very resentful of my siblings for this because the reason why I was resentful of my siblings for this is like, well, I mean, shit, man, I got problems too. I got issues too. Like, why aren't you paying attention to me? Why don't you love me? Why don't you do this? And my parents love me, and I don't doubt that at all, but that's how I felt. And I think this really hit home when Arthur Brooks, who's been just a remarkably positive influence in my life in terms of the content that I absorb, he has this thing called the idols test, which was taken by St. Thomas Aquinas, who basically said the 4 main idolatry patterns that people fall into are money, pleasure, power, and either fame or recognition, status. It's kind of like that thing in the back end. And my idol is the last one. It's fame, recognition, status. I want people to see me. I want people to tell me good job. I want people to love me. I want people to affirm me when I do something well. And I think a lot of that stems from the self-sufficiency problem. And I think I didn't get that a lot from my parents. I would bring home A's on papers. I was a pretty smart kid naturally. I studied a little bit, but not a lot. And I would bring home A's all the time, but that was the standard for me. And my brother would bring home like a C on a test, and my parents would be like, oh my God, that's so great. I'm like, if I got a C, like, what the heck? Like that would be like the apocalypse as far as I was concerned back then. And I now know, as a hopefully more mature person, that you have different standards for different people. For a C, for my brother in certain subjects, he was pretty good. For me, it would be the apocalypse. And so A's were the standard for me and everything else. But again, as shaping my brain and my mentality towards the world, I took offense to that. And I said, well, what the hell? Like, why don't you appreciate what I do? Why don't you appreciate what I bring to the table? All that sort of thing. And that affected me quite a bit. And I think that all stemmed from just my love for my sister and my sister's disability. And I think that it kind of, made me think that the world is out to get me. And I have to do everything I can to just punch and kick and struggle and scrape and claw to just fight it. And I'm a fighter by nature. I always say if someone takes a shot at me, I'm going to hit them back 10 times harder. It's the Vivek Ramaswamy quote. And I believe that, and I do that. Like if someone comes at me in a sales call, if someone comes at me, like I've gotten into fights with corporate executives about this when I was in the corporate world. I called out a manager that was 5 levels above me once for saying something that I didn't think was true. But I realize that stems from that. And I'm looking to reconcile that now, and I'm coming to terms with a lot of that now, and looking to kind of say, like, okay, how can I get better from this now and not have that as my mentality? But that's how I feel. And it's not anybody's fault because, again, it's just circumstances, and people deal with circumstances a lot differently. And it's not my parents' fault. I don't think it's my fault necessarily all the way. It's not my sister's fault. It's not my brother's fault. It's not anybody's fault. It's not God's fault. It's just the way that things are. And I think that was the foundation that shaped everything going afterwards. So my sister's disability and really what led to my self-sufficiency problem is really the first story that really kind of shaped me going forward.